Contrary to what you've been taught and told, you do not need to cool down after training, and I'm going to show you why. You're always told to cool down after training, static stretching, doing some light biking, swimming, whatever it is, all in the guise of improving performance the next day or reducing muscle soreness or restoring flexibility. However, these things may not happen in the real world, and I'm going to break down some of the research and my own experiences around cooldowns. So the first thing is looking at same day performance. As martial artists, many of us train twice a day if we have the time, especially if you're in sports like MMA. We have multiple qualities and martial arts you need to cover within a training week, or if you're training leading up to a competition and you need to cover strength conditioning on top of what you're doing regarding technical training. So when we look at same day performance, we're looking at sessions that are greater than 4 hours apart. So for example, you go to the gym in the morning and then technical training in the evening. This would apply to you. Now, when we look at what the research has currently, looking at 20-minute active recovery, this one in professional young soccer players. So 20-minute active recovery, in this instance, is something like jogging, walking, some static stretching, etc. So nothing crazy, just light activity. And what they found was, okay, there may be some reduced muscle soreness in this group, but it did not lead to any performance improvements. And then we have multiple studies backing this up. So no performance improvements with similar active recovery modalities in futsal players, in the military, and in elite level weightlifting. And these are all compared to a passive recovery or passive cooldown, which is just sitting there doing nothing. Now, this may vary by individual. So within the research, some individuals showed performance improvements and some showed detriments in improvements, averaging out to seeing no performance improvements. So you may need to play this by ear, trial and error, see how you feel doing them. In my experience, I never do cooldowns. I don't think there's any purpose in doing a cooldown other than just sitting there, or maybe if you're going for a leisurely swim, etc. I wouldn't label it as a cooldown, but to me, you're just adding extra junk work on top of what you've already done. Now, I like to take the philosophy of Vern Gambetta. You can actually listen to him on the Sweet Science of Fighting podcast if you search that a little while back. But he's got a saying that the body remembers what you did last. And if you're trying to develop something like strength, power, speed, that should be the last thing you do in your session or whatever it is. And then if you're doing junk slow reps on top of that, the last thing your body did was these last junk slow reps. So I prefer to not do any kind of cooldown. But is there any benefit to cooling down to improve performance in training the following day? Now, when we're looking at next day performance, we see there is no performance increase when performing an active cooldown in this cohort of non-professional netball players. We see that within the active cooldown compared to the passive cooldown, we see increased heart rate, increased blood lactate, an increased rate of perceived exertion, meaning that this cooldown was perceived as potentially harder than just sitting there. And obviously with these physiological markers, potentially this cooldown was too intense for this cohort of athletes, leading to no performance increase. Now, when we look at some of the more commonly stated benefits of cooling down, we see that there's no increase in flexibility, there's no reduction in feeling stiff, and there's no reduction in muscle soreness, especially within non-elite athletes. So just your average weekend warrior, or even just someone training who's competing nationally, recreationally, etc. These things do not improve with a cooldown. Now, this potentially changes in elite athletes where they may see reduced muscle soreness the following day, but that is a very small population of people. Now, when you perform a water-based cooldown, so in the pool, moving around, you may see an attenuation in the decline in muscle power the following day, meaning you don't see such a big drop off in muscle power compared to someone who did nothing. Now, this may be beneficial, especially being in water, considering there's the hydrostatic pressure of water. So water has a massaging effect. That is why pool sessions and being in the pool is generally a very effective recovery modality. So this one might have some merit, but obviously it is equipment or location dependent to be able to be in a pool. So I know I mentioned that I don't perform any cooldowns, but if you were going to perform a cooldown, what would you do, or what would I recommend you do? Again, I refer back to Vern Gambetta. I really like his philosophy around cooling down, almost thinking of it as a neural reset or preparing yourself for the next day. One of his examples is if you're a thrower and you throw right-handed, you would make some throws left-handed. So you can bring this over to combat sports. If you're a boxer, and you box orthodox, you can do some light shadow boxing rounds southpaw. Same thing with grappling. You can do some shadow wrestling in your opposite stance. These are some things that you could do as a cool down, still going to develop your skills at the same time. 5 to 10 minutes of that, nice and light, is something that you could do. Another thing to do, instead of just going for a simple mindless jog, use high and low hurdles, and you can step over and duck under. Very simple mobility drill to get you moving at the end of a session. These are just very simple examples. Typically, again, I wouldn't even perform a cool down. There is some cool little mini band routines you can use as well on the floor as part of that. I used to do with professional rugby players. But again, as someone who might be time crunched, as a combat athlete who works full time, everything like that, you don't need to spend another 10 or 20 minutes in the gym performing a cool down to potentially reduce muscle soreness, etc., because it's probably not going to have any real effect. Make sure to like and subscribe. If you enjoyed this video, please let me know down in the comments, and if there's any other topics you want me to cover in the comments, is where you can let me know so I can create more content for you.